Running our own business isn't easy, and it can be a tough gig for all of us at times, and only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And on ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things just that little bit easier by interviewing guests who have been where you are now, regardless of where you are on the scale-up journey, and maybe facing some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked well for them, as well as what didn't, of course. And we've also combined many of these lessons into a practical scale-up handbook called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. And there's details of this at the end of the episode. So welcome to ScaleUp Radio. Welcome to another episode of ScaleUp Radio. I'm delighted today to be joined by Zach Rattner, who is the co-founder and CTO of YEMBO. So Zach, welcome to ScaleUp Radio.
Hey, Kevin. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
It's a pleasure. And you're joining us from California today, I believe.
Yep, here in sunny San Diego.
Yeah, good. So yeah, we've just about got the sun here in England, but and it's later on in the afternoon. But no, it's great to have you on. So YEMBO, for those that haven't heard of YEMBO yet, what's it all about?
So YEMBO, we're working on it becoming a household name. But YEMBO is a computer vision technology company, and we provide estimates in home services. So think about if you're moving, if you're getting a property insurance quote, if you need junk removal done. These industries are typically very labor intensive to give a quote because you need to be an expert, you need to know what to look for. So as a result, the sales cycles can be long because you need to wait for someone to come to your house. So What YEMBO does is we provide technology where someone can scan a quick video and you can get insights to be able to price these kinds of jobs that have historically been very difficult to price.
Okay, so you're avoiding the need for somebody for the delay, essentially, of somebody to come out and actually go and do those things.
Exactly. Yep.
And there's AI involved in it as well, I believe, isn't there? How does that work?
Sure. Well, I mean, if you look at the room behind me as an example, I've got a lot of books on the shelf. So if I were to be moving, the thing about moving is people typically move everything. So someone would come in the room and they'd have to look at the furniture. They'd have to look at how many boxes do I need to go bring? Because if you don't bring enough boxes, then where are the books going to go? Okay. So that process is historically very labor intensive, right? Someone's got to have done it before to know, have experience, look around to do these things. So what we do is we provide a tool for the mover to send a link. The customer scans quick videos. We'll detect, I see these books and these are the cartons that we would need. And we provide back to the mover what we call the visual inventory. So historically, this is like, just think of it like a spreadsheet. There's like a list of items and quantities and things like that. Yeah. So we give a tool that is very visual. So you still have the mover. We still are going through a sales process, but we've kind of cut out the delay. We've cut out the trip. We cut out the wear and tear in your vehicle. We've cut out the counting of boxes, and we've made that conversation much more relevant and high fidelity because you can actually go over the visual of what's there as opposed to like asking someone over a phone call, how many boxes will your office fit into?
I love that. And it's a great example of how clever little bit of tech can really help to address a crunch point within a market, within something that really bugs us, that we can get around with a bit of technology. It reminds me, years ago, I heard an example of a landscape company that would do your garden maintenance and things like that, and they struggled to scale beyond a certain point. And they happened to meet up. It was the early days of Google Maps. I think it was even before it was called Google Maps. But they happened to meet up and find out about this, and they realized that they could use Google Maps to basically be able to quote for doing garden maintenance, because they could measure the size of the garden. They could work out whether there was a swimming pool in there as well, and how to do that. And it meant that they could then scale to the next level, whereas the rate limiting step before then was being able to have enough people to go out and do the quotes, and then they waited for the quotes to get approved and all that. So you're doing something like that, but at a bigger scale, using something even cleverer and using a bit of AI to really cut out the delays.
Exactly. No, I think that's a great use case. I mean, we've seen it in our business as well, in that people will have a certain area that they service. And a lot of times, like here in Southern California, we have really bad traffic. So a lot of times that area that you service, it's like, I know I'm going to take 2 hours to drive. And at the point in the sales process when you're doing this, you have no guarantee of the business, right? Like person could have said, oh, sorry, I turn you away at the door and say, oh, sorry, I closed to somebody else. So what we're doing is we're noticing people can service other areas now, where if you know you have that job because you close them remotely, I don't mind sitting in traffic for 2 hours maybe, because I can factor all these things into my costs. But it's the unknown where you have to drive out there. You have no idea if you're going to close or not. And then there's all this time and effort and cost that just puts the service provider in a bad spot. And I think the key is it's not for lack of trying, right? Like these are the best of the best in this industry. They run into these issues because you're up against physics, right? If you're trying to drive somewhere, you got to burn fuel, you got to take the time. And I think that's one big key that just got me excited when we were starting a company, was that we can really help these folks do something that is perceived to be magic today. Because like doing these estimates, there was one way that they were done. Video surveys were just barely becoming a thing. People were becoming comfortable with FaceTime. And then we came along and my co-founder and I wanted to bring the advancements of computer vision technology into an industry that was not going to see it coming. We felt like there were enough people working on drones and self-driving cars that we wanted to kind of go in a different direction. And that's where we ended up.
Absolutely. And you're making that experience. It's not just about being more efficient for you as a business, but it's a much better experience for the customer. Because as you said, I don't have to spend hours wandering around my house or answering lots of questions or all of those things. So and equally we can get to a quote much more quickly. So it's better all around, not just from a business efficiency point of view.
For sure. And I think this is an area that there are a lot of industries that are kind of ripe for this change. There's this concept of the entrepreneurial event, and in the school of thought, it's like there's a particular moment that happens that flips a switch, and then you've become an entrepreneur. And it's a helpful mental model. I don't know if it's perfect, but my co-founder and I had this frustration where I bought a toothbrush on Amazon, and it cost about $3, I think. But the customer experience was pretty awesome, right? I shopped around. Within 30 seconds, I found it. I could track it all the way through and see where exactly it was going to be, what time it was going to show up at my door. After it showed up, there was a picture, so that there was proof that it was delivered. Yeah. And it just rubbed me the wrong way that I can buy a $3 toothbrush and have this amazing click and it's done customer experience. But when you're having these much more substantial purchases in your life, like moving, like getting property insurance, remodeling, doing junk removal, that the process just goes back to like a previous era of technology. Yeah. And just like the fact that we're living in that world and they weren't two different ones, it was the same. It just seemed like a contradiction and we had to do something about it. It was just like this nagging sense that wasn't right.
I love it. And it just goes to show that it doesn't have to be a sexy industry to be a sexy business, if you like, and for us to do something really, really clever and really neat. So how does the business model work? How do you make money?
Sure. So we sell software on a subscription basis, software as a service, and we sell it to the service provider. We went through a couple different iterations in our early days, and we found that this works because the service provider is the one that feels the pain of not having the tool. So they're used to maybe spending a couple $100. So we say, hey, don't do that. Spend tens of dollars on our tool instead. It's free to the end user, free to the customer. Yeah. I don't know that many industries where people love paying for quotes as the end consumer. So we don't change that. And then just like most software, we have cloud bills. So the more the service provider commits and the longer they can commit for, then the more we can go get discounts from our cloud vendors and pass that along. So you get the kind of economies of scale. If you're committing to a small amount on a monthly basis, the unit rate will be higher. You're doing like thousands a week and you're doing it for multiple years, then the unit economics will be less expensive.
Yeah. So if I'm a service provider and I'm working on doing all the removals, and I think I might do 10 removals in a month, that's one level of package. If I think I'm going to do 100, that's a different level.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds pretty unique. I mean, obviously you've got the standard providers of doing this, but what you're offering here sounds like pretty unique. What's it like from a competitive marketplace? Are you forging the way? Are you creating a kind of market of one, or are you against other people?
Mm-hmm. There are others. I would say that there are other like remote contactless video providers. I check them all out on LinkedIn. I haven't seen anyone else with as many PhD computer vision engineers as YEMBO. Most of them have zero. So it's not a huge number to exceed. But honestly, I think in a lot of these workflows, and I don't think this is just in YEMBO's market. I think tech is a bit of a bubble, right? Is that like something new and shiny comes out, iPhone 15 comes out, everyone trades in their iPhone 14. But if you go outside the tech industry, it's really inertia that I think is our biggest like hurdle to overcome with adoption. Right. Yeah. That when people go through that buying experience, it's not like we're comparing like Yahoo versus Gmail, and it's like a bunch of very similar features. It's you're going into this industry, people have been doing it a certain way for 20, 30, 40 years. And you're proposing something that's not just a tool that they can turn on. There's a process change that goes with it. So you have to be pretty committed to actually see it through. Yeah. Whereas if I'm used to using Gmail and one day I switch to Outlook, it's not really like not a big deal to change. And I'm seeing this more and more in other industries as well. I think, for instance, things like healthcare, there are a lot of entrenched processes. Lots of different scenarios where this comes up. But I feel like that's just a sign that you're in a new market. Someone has to be willing to kind of pioneer and go first, and then they figure everything out, and then it becomes mature. So I think that's kind of where we're at in our space right now. So
there's a fair degree of your marketing and PR activities on educating the market, essentially, and creating that need for change.
Yeah, and I would say it makes like a certain kind of company. So what that means is that we are not we don't do a lot of flashy ads. We don't do a lot of billboards. We don't do a lot of like Facebook ads and things like that. And that's because you don't really know what you're looking at. So I think we can do things that we found to be much more targeted. So I think one of our biggest go-to-market channels that we found works really well are trade shows. These industries that we operate in are very networked, right? If I'm going to move from California to the UK, there's probably not a company that has a presence in the whole world. So they'll partner. And that's what we found is if you have one client in one geography and they like working with you, and they're giving these visual inventories out to their partners, that's a great channel. You can go to these trade shows, you can meet people, shake hands, take them to dinner. And that approach has kind of worked fairly well for us. But if you're a direct to consumer company or something, there's not really like a convention of people who buy tech products who come that I can think of off the top of my head. So it's kind of just custom tailored towards the business that we operate in. And it was a bit counterintuitive. I think I had founder friends when I started and they were saying, oh, you're going to spend so many dollars a month on Google ads. And we basically didn't listen to any of that, and still worked out in the end though.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you've taken a kind of a low tech sector, you've got a high tech product, but the way that you're marketing again is old school, low tech relationship, partnerships, that kind of thing. So interesting. And what sort of scale have you reached already with the business?
A typical survey is about 15-20 seconds per room. So we are ingesting a couple hundred hours, like 200-300 hours of video a day. That's spanning about a couple hundred clients in about 20 different countries, and lots of fun challenges that have come along the way with that. Entering into the EU, we had to figure out GDPR. Actually, the week that we launched was 1 week before GDPR took effect. So we worked with our attorneys. We thought we had everything, and like there were a bunch of last minute changes. It's also funny with the product is different perceptions around usage. So in the US, people very rarely inquire about the data. It's just kind of like a given, okay, I'm going to upload the video, you'll process it, you'll give me the quote back. And we're very transparent. Like that's our business model. The mover uses it for the purposes of the quote. It's very straightforward. And people don't really ask. I think we were live in Germany on Monday, and Tuesday our first data takedown request came in. But like you go into these new markets and people just have different perceptions. And being open to that and not just assuming that the world is going to be like a cookie cutter where you can repeat everything has been a lot of lessons we learned along the way with that.
Yeah, and we'll come into some of those again in a moment, I'm sure. And I think you've also rapidly grown the number of people within the business because, again, although it's AI tech, there's a lot of big people requirement behind the business. I'm imagining from the development side, and so where are you at with the number of people in the team?
Sure. So now we're about 70 folks in international and in the US, about half of that stateside, other half in other areas. And I think you hit the nail on the head is we say that AI is like the engine of the car, but people don't want to buy an engine. They want to buy a car. So when you look at the use cases that AI is addressing, it's really it's a process problem, not a technology problem. So yes, there's object detection going on, but nobody wants to buy an object detector. They want to log into something. They want to use it. They want to get an outcome. And that's where a lot of the personnel has needed to come from is we need to build software around this. We need to design it well. We need to make sure people are trained if you have questions. We're embedding ourselves in a very time sensitive part of somebody's workflow. So if I take like 2-3 days to get back to you because you have a question, that customer may be going and shopping somewhere else. So we have to respond quickly. And I think that's one area too that we've learned almost by accident around so kind of setting up a business to scale is I feel like time zones get a really bad reputation for, I got to get up and have this meeting at like an inopportune time, things like that. But what we've been able to do is we have 3 teams, one in the US, one in Ukraine, one in India. Right. And what we found is if you look at where it's 9 to 5 on a map in those countries, there's very little overlap. But there's great handoff. So when the day's ending in one, it's kind of starting in the other. Yeah. So what we did was we specialized and hired certain roles for the overall product development process and made it work well with kind of like 3 shifts. So as a result, you design it, architect it in the US, implement it with all the details around it's got to work in different browsers, do all of that out of Eastern Europe. And then in India, we do all the QA and testing, integration, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So when you set all that up, you get the benefit of 24-hour progress, but nobody's working 24 hours. So you don't get burnout and issues like that. So I think that's one of those things that we kind of learn to use to our advantage. So I would, I don't know if there's like a time zone evangelist group, but I feel like I'm always going around telling people, no, like it's not a problem. You're just, you're just not having good processes around it if you're having issues with it.
Very good. No, I think that's an excellent takeaway. And you've grown rapidly. So you were saying that pre-COVID, you were around about 9 people. You're now about 70 people. So that's pretty rapid growth. You're working across 20 countries, 3 time zones by the sound of it with the development. So how do you keep control of everything that's going on?
I think the first thing is plan on retooling everything every 6 months or so. Right. So I'd say startups go through these chapters, like these phases, and a chapter can last a year. In a period of growth, maybe it's just a couple of months. So there are a lot of things that worked for a period and then you have to kind of throw it out. Yeah, I think one of the things that COVID sort of accelerated was we had to get really good fast at written communication. So before we're a small team, we're all sitting in the same office. Maybe I'm making the back end, someone else is making the front end, someone else is designing it. So if you have a question, just blurt it out and the right people will hear it. Mm-hmm. And then when you go to a remote based setting, you have to be much more mindful. You have to think about, okay, I'm going to get on a call with you, Kevin, but no one's going to overhear that on Zoom. I need to think about who else needs to be here. If there are time zone considerations, you need to like factor in when you do it. So we actually got pretty disciplined around documenting. And this kind of paved the way for being able to have those 3 teams is you can't just test the app. You have to explain, here's what I built, here's how it's supposed to work, and here's what the outcome you should get is. Yeah. So we ended up making processes around that and putting it in our operating manuals. When we hire, we train people with it. And the idea would be, if you're going to build a feature and you want to hand it off to have it be, have details be built out, like get really crisp around the interfaces. Usually a person working in isolation can do great work on their own. Challenges usually come up when my work is like talking to your work. And if you don't have a clear boundary of like the interface, then challenges come up. So we like specifically put steps in the workflow where you have to think through those things first before you start around where do I hand off and you begin. And I think by like tooling things that way, it kind of laid the groundwork where it wasn't so dramatic. At first, I'm writing it for somebody who's in my town, but because of shelter in place, I can't talk to them. Then we got good at that and said, hey, now when we're hiring, I'm not limited by geography. I can find the best time for it. And we found it's useful to be able to go to sleep, have some work done, wake up, get the report back. So then we started saying, hey, for this kind of work, it's actually more convenient to happen in this geography versus this one. And it let us kind of like fine tune and custom tailor the workflow so that we can continue to ship at a fast clip, even though the company's growing, there's more complexity, all those fun things.
Very good. And does that also mean that you need to recruit a particular type of person? Because, I mean, there are certainly at least a couple of kinds of developers. There's certainly those that like to be in their own world and they don't want anybody else to touch their code and all those kind of things. And that clearly wouldn't work in your environment. So I'm guessing then you need to find people that are able to stop maybe that development, know that they then need to spend some time in how they hand that over and communicate, and they're happy to work in teams and have other people to hand over to.
Yeah, I would say it is a way of working. It works well for us.
Yeah.
But I feel like, again, we've grown, but we're still a startup. Most people in the world don't work at YEMBO. And if you look at when we're trying to grow or bring on a new person, we're not always, we don't need like to make a model that works for every particular software engineer. You're really looking for like 2-3 people. And it's like, I need 2 people for this, 3 people for that. And I feel like that brings the like pressure down in the room where, I have an opinion. There are certain kinds of engineers that will do well. There are certain kinds who won't, but I'm looking for 2. I'm not looking for like, to make something that's like needs to be universally applicable. And I honestly think it makes the overall product better is just looking at code that I wrote in my early days when there wasn't any other engineer to help. I had usability issues. I'd have bugs because like you can only think of so many things. But in our process today, it's most things that get shipped. There's like 10, 12 different people that have influenced it in some way. So if wording is confusing, if something's just kind of clunky, like those kinds of things usually get resolved internally with our people as opposed to live with real customers who are complaining. So I think it's just kind of a nature of the business that we're in.
Yeah, I love it. It's really a very collaborative way of working. And as you say, you avoid almost you've got, you mentioned the quality assurance is in there, but actually at each of those stages, just as you say, by the virtue of the fact that somebody else has got to pick it up and work on it, there's a degree of quality control going on at every stage anyway. So very, very good. So let's go back to, you had this entrepreneurial event with the toothbrush right back at the beginning. So what? Take us through how you got together with your co-founder, how you started the business, and where you went from there.
Sure. There was a little bit more to it than buying a toothbrush, but that was kind of the moment. But so I've been a software engineer my whole career. I majored in computer engineering, studied math as well. And then got a job as a software engineer, kind of paid for college, working as a web developer.
Right.
I joined a telecom company called Qualcomm. So if you know the signal bars that you see on your phone when you're driving down the highway, going out of range of one tower into range of another, I spent a few years on that team that would make you not drop the call. Much easier said than done, but lots of complicated math that goes into that. And I had a opportunity come up to join a newer team after a few years that was working on kind of more growth areas. So that was an established part of the modem business, but going into new directions. And that's where I got to get a bit more hands-on with computer vision technology. That's where I met my now co-founder. And I felt like I was living in 2 worlds. So by day, I was going to these industry events, learning computer vision, seeing like what the latest and greatest in that field was. my wife worked at a moving company, and we are initially from the East Coast of the United States. We moved to California on the West Coast. And when she put in her notice, she was trying to resign because we were going to move. And they liked her and said, no, most of your business is international anyway. We'd hate to see you leave. Why don't you just work remotely? And I think one of the best things that she did was she didn't take my advice. I said, hey, just give 2 weeks notice. We'll find another job out in California. It's fine. But she just said she didn't feel right doing that. She didn't. And what happened next was I'd come home from work to the back office of a moving company because she's working from home. So I would get to see all of the things that would go well when logistics are done right. I get to see all the problems that would come up if you overlook details. And just living in those two worlds, where come back from a conference and there was a company that was convinced that the future of all skyscrapers were going to be built by drones. And they were convinced that there was going to be AI that would pick up the raw materials, put them in place, and that we wouldn't have to like physically build things with our hands anymore. I don't know, maybe they're still working on it. I haven't seen it, but like people would have these kind of crazy out there ideas on one hand, and we'd come back home and my wife would say, oh, we sent a 12-foot truck, but we should have sent a 16-foot truck. Now there are all these problems that come up. So that's what kind of maybe brought me back down to earth and realized there's so many interesting problems right in front of our faces. And I feel like the typical Silicon Valley approach is to get like fascinated over landing on Mars or terraforming the moon or whatever. But like there are so many ways that you can positively impact somebody's life and improve an industry, focusing on like workflows and what are people actually doing today and what do they enjoy doing, what do they not enjoy doing. So like you mentioned before, the concept of sexy markets. I think sexy is a huge distraction most of the time. Is that it kind of attracts fluff and hype. And I feel like where we've kind of ended up, if you can get the job done better and it gives a better customer experience, then you get kind of permission to come into work for another day because you improve somebody's life. And if you overcomplicate and make a bunch of bells and whistles that don't really drive adoption, well, then you're going to have some retention issues down the road when renewal time comes up.
Yeah, brilliant. So what's your co-founder's name?
His name is Sid.
Sid. So you and Sid decide that you're going to leave your jobs and set this up? How did you?
Sure. So it actually, the timing worked out that I had to take basically, I call it my professional gap year. So I did some consulting for a while. So I knew I wanted to work at a startup, had a million ideas for a bunch of different things. I actually made the name YEMBO when I was a teenager, and I would just affix it to whatever project of the day was taking my attention.
Does it mean anything? Does it come from anything? What's the derivation?
That was the beauty, is it doesn't. So if you file a trademark, there's no opposition. If you Google it, nothing of now we come up, but before nothing came up. But I liked the idea of having a 2-syllable name. A 5-letter.com. I basically, you tell I'm an engineer. I looked at other tech companies. I looked at, hey, there's Google, Yahoo, Apple, and I was trying to reverse engineer like what makes a good tech name. And then the ability to become a verb was a really big one. That now we've got clients saying, hey, just YEMBO it, which I feel like is important from a branding perspective. But anyway, the point being, it takes a long time to get fundamental technology kind of up and running off the ground. And I wasn't really delusional about that. So I knew I wanted to do a startup. And I had a few different like friends doing startups. I had an opportunity to work on a couple different projects. So I left the job. YEMBO didn't exist yet, kind of worked on these other areas that I felt like was getting me closer to a startup. And then kind of YEMBO started kind of as a hobby in that and worked its way up. And then we kind of got it to the point where it was worth justifying spending some more time on. But I feel like in the very early days, when you're trying to get something up and running off the ground, a startup looks a lot like an expensive hobby, right? Because you're like sinking a lot of time into it. Takes you away from your family, putting a lot of money in it. And if there will ever be a return is kind of unclear. But I mean, if you're going for like a bachelor party or something, or you going mountain biking or skiing, like you don't really consider the ROI, right? Like you just consider it a hobby. So I think that it was a good amount of time where it was there. And my wife and I came up with some ground rules and some parameters. And we figured that there are a lot of good ideas out there for startups, but what would be relevant for us, like I was relatively early in my career, never done a startup before, is I wanted to have like a customer within a year. Is I knew it was going to be possible like someday, but if this was going to be like a 10-year research project, it was just not the right startup idea for where I was at. So we got these ground rules. We negotiated the dollar amount I was allowed to take out of the savings account, and if I needed to go over that, I had to do more consulting projects to bring in those dollars. And I feel like it was healthy, because I feel like if I was on my own doing those kinds of decisions, you get like stuck in a rut, and you're like, because I'm already in this hole, I'm going to throw another dollar at another day at it. But like having a timeline and a fixed budget, it kind of makes you focus on, okay, what's the outcome that I can realistically achieve to see here? And our goals are pretty simple: is get a customer and bring in enough revenue that I can justify an office, that I don't need to work from home. So that was like goal number one.
Great.
So I had a 12-month timeline to do it, and did it in 10. So it came pretty close.
Excellent. And you bootstrapped from there. You didn't go out and raise any money.
We did raise after we got our first customer.
Right.
And that was, I felt like something that was pretty important, just because you kind of need to know you're onto something. And it's like almost easy to delude yourself like that you're going to do a great idea. But we did everything that we could to make sure that we're building something that is actually valuable to people. You asked in the earlier part of the call about the business model. We actually experimented with that before we had a product. We did this thing called a letter of intent, where it's not legally binding, but you're basically like negotiating with a prospective customer saying, if XYZ features were to exist, then I would pay so many dollars for it. And we tried different things. And it's funny because you're turning on the part of your prospect's brain that is negotiating, even if you're not actually exchanging dollars. So you get really good feedback. So we tried per user licenses. We tried like varying amounts based on how big the room was, or how many rooms were in the home. There were so many different things that we kind of went back and forth on. So by the time we were like going heads down and building, we already had like a backlog of clients that were interested. We already had like an idea around how it would get deployed. And that kind of, I think, de-risked the go-to-market plan, so that as soon as we had it, it was there.
And psychologically, they're semi-invested in you as well, because they've been involved in advising you essentially, and they've come up with some ideas, and you've responded to those ideas, and psychologically, there's a little bit that they feel almost, I'm part of that, so
yeah. I mean, again, it doesn't guarantee you anything, but it certainly makes it more natural if you want to follow up 3 months later with a big update. Like it's you can just reply to your old email. You don't have to like go prospect and call from scratch. So yeah, I definitely think that played a role.
Great. And how did you set up things with Sid then? At what point did you kind of get formal and say, right, this is how we're going to split the equity and the roles? When did that happen, and how did you go about that?
I think we did it. I mean, it started out as a hobby, and we had like one false start conversation where it was like kind of too early, but I think overall it wasn't a very hard conversation, because we're kind of on the same page. So now he's the CEO, I'm the CTO. Right. I always wanted to be in the engineering world, managing the engineering team. He was more interested in the business side of things. So even though it was like the product was my idea, I didn't really have hard feelings giving the CEO title to him, because I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to run the engineering team, and I wanted to do something challenging on the engineering side where I knew that was going to be kind of all consuming. And if I am trying to do too many things, I'd be bad at it. So I think we had one conversation and we decided, hey, this is like we're in the hobby stage now. Let's just like try to get to the point where we can prove the technology is possible. So we, at least you and I, know what we need to do. And let's go and do enough market development that we can get like a short list of folks that would be interested in trying it out. And if we can't do that, then let's just stop and go figure out something else to do. If we can get that, then let's regroup. So then we had that conversation, and then we kind of came up with all of that. And we also ran it by our wives too, and said like, what do you think? So we figured it's a big commitment, and people usually rush into the I've seen there's a tendency to rush into these kinds of things and then have some kind of huge difference around. I had a call from a friend who said, my co-founder locked me out of the bank account. What do I do? And I told him the issue happened way earlier. Like, I think it's kind of late now. But we kind of also had the benefit of working together 5 years or so beforehand. So we're kind of known quantities. I think just by having those conversations early, it allows you to kind of detach yourself from whatever the like urgency of the day is. Like if you have a term sheet from an investor and you don't know who's going to be CEO, I think there's going to be issues and tensions there. So by having it in kind of like when it was still awkward around like, hey, how long can you go without a salary? It's kind of a weird question to ask somebody. And you have to be like honest, because if you aren't honest, then there can be issues later when you need a salary and don't have one. Yeah. But by having it in the abstract, like it kind of makes it less awkward. So I almost liken it to like going to your doctor and getting like your physicals and getting checked up on. Like if you go often and you check in early, they can prevent issues. But if you like wait until there's some horrible problem, then it's going to be much more work to get yourself out of that.
Yeah, be proactive about it, the old preventative medicine sort of approach. And so did you put in place formal shareholders agreement early on?
Yeah, so when we so it was like a hobby for a while. We were keeping a Google spreadsheet of expenses. And then after a couple of months, we were like, hey, this looks like it's going to work out. So then we got it with our law firm, who we're still working with today. We incorporated, we did shareholder agreement, made a bank account. I don't know if this happens in the UK, but in the US, it's all public record when you file a company. So the deluge of junk mail that you get of like all these offers that come.
Yeah. We can do your accounts and whatever. Yep.
Yeah. So you got all these crazy offers and things. And then kind of we're off to the races then.
All right. And how did you go about agreeing the equity split?
So we agreed on roles first, because I think this is another thing that people don't always see eye to eye on, is if you just like jump to the number and you say, okay, I think I'm worth blah, but you're not clear on roles, everybody's going to think that the other person has too much, right? Yeah. So I feel like what we started off with was a common understanding. We want this to work well for everybody, right? Like, I wouldn't want to be successful and have my co-founder feel like I screwed him over. That doesn't seem fair. So we said, okay, we want it to be fair, but let's look at like day to day. Let's look at what you would like to be responsible for. Then you can do a fun exercise where once you get on the same page there, split. I write what I think, you write what you think on a piece of paper, then talk about it. And we both ended up writing the same number. So we're like, all right, I guess that's good to go. But I feel like we wouldn't have if we skip the step around responsibilities, because I feel like that's really where the rubber meets the road, right? Is like everyone says, well, you wouldn't have the company without me. It's my idea. But like the idea is like one little step, but there's so many things that you need to be responsible for and own as the company grows and scales. And I would say that that's usually, even if you're taking like, if you're looking at other companies or you're bringing on an executive or something like that, that it's like the responsibilities that you own that usually ties what those things are, more so than like one singular event in the past that people like have these emotional attachments to. Yeah,
very good. Excellent advice. And when you went for the funding, what sort of lessons did you learn from going through that approach?
I think in general, do it for a goal. So you should always be able to justify why you're doing it. It takes away about 6 months of your life, in my experience. Yeah. When you're doing that, you are not as hands-on day to day in the product. There's a lot of other things with opportunity costs that you're giving up. So I think one of the things that we learned was figure out what the goals are, figure out why you're doing it, focus, do it, and try to minimize the amount of time you're doing it, because you're like kind of away from the day-to-day operational work. And your team can fill in for some parts of that, but like at the end of the day, you don't want to come back at the end of the year and say, I didn't do anything on the product this year because I was just fundraising the whole time. So I think that also involves some discipline, because you do get reached out to. And we were pretty strict around not taking introductory calls outside of fundraising meetings. Like we were friendly, we'd agree to like meet, but we wouldn't let it get serious. So like you'd maybe like take like a 5-minute intro call from somebody just to get on each other's radar. Yeah. But like if people asked for a deck, we would just be clear around, look, I've been on this road before. I know like the amount of questions that's going to open up and the commitment on the time. Like I'm planning on kicking off a round in 2-3 quarters. So like we were respectful, but we were basically mindful of the time commitment it takes up, because I think you can delude yourself just looking at tech news. You just see the banner headline price and who invested, but like it's a numbers game. And for every one that works out, you may need to talk to 100 that don't. Yeah. So just being realistic around the time that it takes, even just remembering the names of the people you're talking to, it's like it's challenging because you're talking to that many people.
Yeah, very good. And how did you decide how much you needed to raise and how much you were willing to give away in terms of equity?
My engineer might show, but we knew what we wanted to do in terms of like the product that we wanted to build, and we knew the market it was serving, and had enough validation on the price point that we were going to charge. So we kind of understood what comes out of it. So like all great ideas that I feel like we've had, go into Google Sheets and make a spreadsheet. We looked at the people that would be needed for that. Obviously, we added some padding because it's our first time doing this. So you don't want to just raise every cent you anticipate that have some unexpected thing come up and throw it sideways. Yeah. And also looking at comps and understanding like valuation and being what's reasonable. Like we didn't want to be outliers. We always say we want to innovate on our product and that's it. So like the way that we organize our cap table, I don't want to be innovative there. I want to just like be normal. The way that we like incentivize employees, you want like, it shouldn't take like an hour for them to explain it to their families. Yeah. So I think with these kinds of things, you can look at, there's like data sources out there. You can look at like Series A, Series B, Series seed stage startups, like how much did they raise? What was the median valuation? Like how long did it take to hit the next milestone? Yeah, I think you only really make your lawyers richer if you do things that are weird and innovative in that stage, because then they need to like go understand as someone who's billing a lot each hour, looking at what on earth did you guys do? And I've just heard a lot of stories from other founder friends and things like that around non-standard things. So we just generally try to avoid them when we can. Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. And I know you've written a book about your experiences of building an AI-based company called Grow Up Fast, I believe is the book. So you capture a lot of your lessons in there. What one or two things might you pull out as lessons learned in so far in your scale-up journey with a AI-based business?
Sure. Yeah. So the name of the book is called Grow Up Fast, Lessons from an AI Startup. And it covers the main lessons that we learned in the last 7 years or so of running YEMBO. I think we've talked a lot around like having the tough conversations up front. I think that's one we talk about more in there. Yeah. I think the other kind of flip side of this is there's a big tendency in business to focus on solving problems. Like an issue comes up and okay, who's going to do something and what are they going to do and what timeline can we expect? But I think the flip side that we've seen is that celebrating the wins can be just as important as fixing the problems. This is an area that I feel like I didn't naturally know. I had to kind of make a couple of mistakes, hurt some feelings along the way, and then ultimately learn it. But you don't want to be a kind of manager or the kind of leader that is always complaining, right? That like you either hear a complaint or you hear nothing. Yeah. So what we did is we actually got intentional around the things that we value, and then we started kind of celebrating those things. So a kind of a fun example of this is because we're pioneering in a space, we focus a lot on intellectual property and patents. And if you've gone through that process, it's kind of tedious. You have to write these long legal arguments that are describing technical things, get with the lawyer, and then there's a lawyer on the government side whose job is to tell you no, and you have to go back and forth. And it usually takes like a year or two. Yeah. But it's really valuable, I think, in terms of like people evaluating, can I build this myself or should I partner with someone? Like having that portfolio, it's very valuable to the company. But if you ask an engineer to do it, they're like, okay, well, if you ask me to, I will, but like, it doesn't sound particularly fun. So we actually got a relationship with a fine silver mint. And if you get a patent granted, one of the artists on our team will design a coin with the faces of the artists on the front and the patent serial number. And it's like it's not a ridiculously huge expense.
Yeah.
But it's kind of quirky, and it gives the person something they can like take and show their friends and family. And there's something that like comes out as a result of it where you can celebrate the work that you've done. And I think that's a great example because it's more about the narrative. Like you're giving the person more something to talk about and be proud of the work that they did. It's not just like money. I think people just jump back to money and compensation and say like, oh, well, I don't care if you ever say thank you, like just pay me more. And I feel like that works maybe in the short term, but in the long term, you want to kind of give the team the conversational topics that are in alignment with your values. So we're saying, hey, patents are important, but if I actually give you something that shows, hey, this is cool, it kind of like embodies that. And we've done a couple other similar things. Not all of them are as cool as learning to work with silver. But I think that basic idea around people do a lot of crazy stuff at startups and a lot of things they've done for the first time in their career. They're trying really hard. They're going outside their comfort zone. Just showing up is actually like an accomplishment. I think there's a lot more safer places that you can go in your career where you can maybe hide behind a bigger team. You can hide behind your comfort zones, not have to get stretched as much. So just like acknowledging that startups are hard and you chose to have this life. And then when things work out well, like just even simple things like acknowledging the people by name who did it and their contributions. I feel like that I've come a long way from when I first joined, and everything was just task 1, task 2, task 3, task 4, and on to the next one.
Oh, very nice. And what if anything would you do differently over those last seven years? If there's one thing you'd pick out that you would change or do differently?
I think for me, I would definitely spend more time with customers. I think people are good at a particular area, and that's how they found a company. And mine was engineering. I can write code. But then there's that saying, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If I look at the missteps, the things that we built that we probably shouldn't have, we would just jump straight to building, where we probably should have spent a little bit more time spending time with customers, like really learning. We had a fun example. One of our customer success managers was visiting a client a couple of weeks ago, and they had a typewriter in their office, and she thought it was like decor. She thought it was like there, and they're like, oh no, we still use that for certain things. But like, it's like helpful to know, like we laugh as tech people, but like this person has a typewriter in their office and they actually use it and depend on it. So when you're writing code, you got to keep that. You're writing for that person. That's the one person that actually like pays your bills. It's not another engineer. So like just convincing yourself, oh, this is cool because it's possible. I don't see that working out that well. So I feel like, fortunately, we've been right more than we've been wrong. But I mean, in the benefit of hindsight, I think a little bit more time developing the ideas with customers before jumping right in probably would have been saved us some headaches along the way.
Excellent. Very good. So what does the next 5 years hold for you and YEMBO? Well, if we meet up again in 5 years' time on ScaleUp Radio, what would you count as success?
Well, I'd be talking to you about my second book at that point of the new lessons learned. I think we're on track to about bring on a new industry every 5 years. It seems like it's about how long it takes to scope out insurance from the moving one, because we add them on top. We don't stop doing the previous one. So I'd love to be in a third industry. I'd love to be finding ways to kind of connect between these things. One of the things that I'm just generally interested in is if you look at what made the Google search algorithm really take off in its early days, was all the other search algorithms were looking at the pages and analyzing the content of the pages and trying to prop up good content. But what the PageRank algorithm that Google did realized was it's not, I mean, that's part of it, but it's really the links between the pages that are important. And now we have SEO, and it's like this mature industry. But at the time, that was a really radical idea that there's value in not just looking at what's on the page, but who's linking to the page. I feel like we have a similar opportunity at YEMBO where we're spending a lot of time in moving, in insurance, in these other industries. But if you think about it, a person who moves, they usually need to buy insurance. There's a lot of like connection points across these industries. So if we can figure out a couple really interesting parts on the gaps between, I feel like there's certainly something there, but it's early days. I haven't exactly articulated what yet, but I just I have this like gut feeling that I know I need to like go do a little bit more homework on.
Yeah, I love the thinking. Yeah, I love the way of thinking. Absolutely get where you're coming from. Yeah.
But also I think I don't want to have too strict of an idea of what comes next. I think 5 years is a really long time in startup land. And it would be like comical if I could look you in the eye and tell you I know exactly what's going to happen and here's what it's going to look like. I can tell you some arcs of what I think would be like nice to have under our belt and things like that. But I think I can't tell you what I'm going to have for breakfast next week. So absolutely. I probably shouldn't go too specific in 5 years down the road.
I'm not sure I can remember what I had for breakfast this morning, let alone what I'm going to have next week. Yeah. So are you okay for a couple of quick fire questions before we look to wrap?
For sure. Yeah.
Great. So if you could go back to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Value the people around you and don't be afraid to talk and get feedback from other people on your ideas. Much easier to get feedback on an idea than something that you've already done where it's too late.
Yeah, indeed. I think you mentioned one or two things already. What kind of resources would you recommend to others that you found particularly useful, whether that be books, podcasts, or other things that you found particularly useful from your development point of view?
I learn a lot from reading. So I got a lot of value out of The Lean Startup, Build by Tony Fadell, 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. I haven't had as much warm of a reception when I talk to other people. They do have audiobook forums if that's your thing. Audiobooks are great too. But then I also think finding a group of friends, they can be like other founders, but you don't want to just be like in a corner studying these things. And I think the books are important, but like if you can find other people that are also interested in those things where you can bounce ideas off of, ChatGPT is great, but I wouldn't count that quite yet as an alternative. But I think like you kind of want a mentor that's like a couple of years ahead of you, like not so far where they forgot all the details, but also like further along so they can give you some advice. So if you're like a Series seed company, look for a founder at Series A. If you're at A, look at B. But I think having a network around you and people that you can bounce ideas off of, the startup life is kind of brutal. And I found people don't really get it when they haven't gone through it. But if you can find a group of people that can, and there are groups and organizations that are around that. If you go through like an incubator, an accelerator, they kind of have things like that. But I would just say don't try to do it alone because it's crazy.
Very, very sound advice. There's a lot to be said for whether you call them peer groups, mastermind groups, whatever people call them. But those groups of like-minded people, different experiences that can really help. Any bits of technology, obviously YEMBO itself, but any apps or bits of technology you found particularly useful?
A lot. I'm always tinkering, always trying stuff. There's a really simple one that's free. It's called Clocker because we have people in so many different time zones that it goes in the toolbar of your Mac. You click it and it'll show you what time it is in a bunch of different countries.
Nice.
And the killer feature, you can drag a little wheel around and look at if you're trying to find a meeting time in multiple time zones. Just a really, really slick interface.
Great.
A more modern AI one is I believe you might be using it on this call, but OpenAI's Whisper transcription has kind of like totally changed meeting notes. We used to like pass that responsibility around. No one really liked to do it, but now you can just turn on Whisper and end up with a bullet point summary at the end of what you spoke about. That part has been kind of cool.
Yeah, we find those sort of things as there's several around, but yeah, they're fantastic. Who's had the most influence on you, would you say, as a business leader?
I have an advisor who I feel like has been super influential. She ran a business unit at Qualcomm, retired and joined us as an advisor. But she had the benefit too, if she knew me when I was at Qualcomm, when I was an individual contributor. I didn't run anything. So I feel like because I've known her for probably 10, 12 years or so, I don't, she just like gets it. I don't have to like explain all the details about where I'm coming from. And I feel like that's just been really, really valuable. And it's something I generally feel like the tech community overlooks. It's just the value of long-term relationships. Yeah. Like if you hop around and switch jobs every 2-3 years, like your relationships only go so deep. And I just feel like there's a lot of value that I've seen in getting to know someone over the course of 5, 7, 10 years that like you just miss otherwise. So yeah. It's something that I would say don't overlook. Like think about how long Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs knew each other, or the Beatles. Like people who get really good at their craft, they have these long-term relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's got to be something deep in there about however good AI is, those relationships are still going to be really important, aren't they? Good. Exactly. Excellent. I've really enjoyed talking with you, Zach. Been absolutely fascinating, and wish you all the best with your future with YEMBO. If people would like to get hold of you, find out more of YEMBO, or find out how to buy your book, what's the best ways for them to do that? Sure. I'm on LinkedIn, so if you look up Zach Rattner, Rattner on LinkedIn, that's me. YEMBO, you can go to yembo.ai is the website, and the book is called growupfastbook.com if you want to see info there. Fantastic. But if you forget all of that, just go to my LinkedIn. I link to it all there, so feel free to check me out there. That's brilliant. Zach Rattner, thank you very much indeed for being my guest on ScaleUp Radio today. All right, thanks for having me, Kevin. Have a good rest of your day. I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if you're building and scaling your own business, you might well be interested in our book, The Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a practical handbook around scaling a business in a structured way. And you can order a copy on all your favorite online retailers, including an audio version, or you can find it and other supporting resources on our website, www.esusgroup.co.uk. That's esusgroup.co.uk, which is esusgroup.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.